I never imagined that at 72 years old I would discover such a simple truth, but one that completely changed my life. My name is Joe, and 2 years ago, when I woke up with that terrible pain in my knee, I thought my active life had come to an end. The doctor said it was arthritis, and I confess I was scared. At that moment I remembered my parents, who ended up becoming very dependent on others for having given in to age. In the waiting room of the doctor's office, I met Mrs. Margaret, an 85-year-old lady who looked half her age. While we waited, she told me that she also had arthritis, but that she found her salvation in daily movement. "Movement is life, Joe," she told me with that serene smile. That's where I began my journey. At first it was difficult. Every step hurt, and I wanted to give up. I started slowly, walking just to the bakery on the corner. It was about 200 yards, but it felt like a marathon. My daughter Sarah always said, "Dad, go slow, but go every day." And so I did. Every single day, religiously, I went to the bakery, even when I didn't need to buy anything. After a month, I realized I could go a little further. I started going around the block. One block turned into 2, then 3. The most interesting thing is that I met other senior athletes along the way. Soon we formed a little group that met at 7 a.m. to walk together. Mr. Frank, who is 78 years old, always brings music on his battery-powered radio, and Mrs. Cecilia, 70, knows all the neighborhood stories. But it wasn't just walking that entered my routine. I discovered that I can move in various ways throughout the day. When I watch TV, I do simple exercises with my legs. I learned from the physical therapist how to do movements that strengthen my knees. When washing dishes, I do a little dance, swaying my body from side to side. My grandchildren think it's hilarious. One of the biggest changes was deciding to use the elevator less. I live on the 3rd floor, and I started by climbing 1 flight of stairs a day. Today, I climb all 3 flights without stopping. Of course, there are days when my knee complains a bit, and in those moments I respect my body and use the elevator. I learned that it's not about being a hero, but about being persistent and conscious. What impresses me most is how these small changes affected other areas of my life. I sleep better, I have more energy to play with my grandchildren, and even my mood has improved. Sarah says I'm more cheerful, more communicative, and she's right. When I meet other seniors who are discouraged, I always share my experience. The other day I was at the supermarket and met an old work colleague, Robert. He could hardly believe it when he saw me carrying my own groceries. "Joe, you look different," he said, surprised. I told him about my movement routine and how I started slowly, respecting my limits. Robert was so excited that now he's another member of our walking group. The secret, I discovered, is not in doing intense exercises or wanting to compete with young people. It's in keeping the body in constant motion, even if it's light. As the saying goes, still waters run deep. Our body is the same. It needs to move to function well. Today, at 74 years old, I can say that I feel more energetic than when I was 70. The arthritis is still here, but it no longer prevents me from living. I learned that every little movement counts. Getting up from a chair without support, doing simple stretches in the morning, dancing a little while listening to the radio. All of this is movement. All of this is life. After my wife Emily passed away 3 years ago, the kitchen became a strange place for me. For 45 years of marriage, she had always been responsible for our meals. I barely knew how to fry an egg. At first, my daughter Sarah brought me meals, and I ate a lot of frozen food. But along with my new willingness to move, came the desire to take better care of myself. It was during one of our morning walks that Mrs. Cecilia gave me a gentle scolding. "Joe, you can't keep living on frozen food. You need to learn to cook." She was right. I was feeling heavy, without energy, and my blood tests weren't good at all. I started in the simplest way possible. Sarah gave me a basic recipe book, one of those very detailed ones. My first attempt was rice. It seems simple, but I burned 2 pots before getting it right. Gradually, I gained confidence. I discovered that cooking is like a dance. It needs rhythm, patience, and practice. One of the greatest joys was when I managed to recreate the vegetable soup that Emily used to make. Of course, it wasn't exactly like hers, nothing would be, but I discovered that I could make something tasty with my own hands. The smell of spices in the kitchen began to bring back happy memories instead of sadness. My grandson Peter, who's 12, started showing up more often for lunch with me on weekends. At first, I think it was more out of pity for lonely Grandpa, but then he really started to like my cooking. He even taught me how to use my phone to search for recipes on the internet. Now I have a notebook full of printed recipes, with my own notes in the margins. One of the biggest changes was at the farmer's market. Before, I barely knew how to choose a fruit. Now every Saturday morning is sacred. I wake up early, go with my little wheeled basket, a gift from Sarah, and do my weekly shopping. I learned from Mr. Frank how to choose ripe tomatoes, from Mrs. Cecilia how to identify the best salad greens, and I even became friends with Joe from the vegetable stand, who always sets aside the best produce for me. The kitchen, which once seemed a lonely place, became my little corner for experiments. I discovered that I love making soups. It's relaxing to chop the vegetables, smelling the aromas. Each ingredient has its story. Garlic that helps circulation, carrots that are good for eyesight, beans that give strength. I was learning about healthy eating almost without realizing it. The most interesting thing is how cooking changed my relationship with food. Before, I ate without thinking, often in front of the TV. Now, each meal is a special moment. I learned the importance of chewing well, of appreciating the flavors. I even bought a set of nice plates just for myself. After all, eating is also an act of self-love. My daughter noticed the difference in my test results. My cholesterol went down, my glucose normalized, and I even lost a few pounds without trying. The doctor was impressed and asked me to share my experience with other patients. "Joe, you're proof that it's never too late to learn," he said. Today, at 74 years old, I'm proud to say that I make my own meals. They're not sophisticated dishes, but they're healthy and made with love. Every Sunday, I gather the family for a special lunch. Seeing my children and grandchildren praising my cooking is one of the greatest joys I have. Sometimes when I'm cooking, I feel that Emily would be proud of me, not for becoming a great cook, but for finding a new way to take care of myself and show love, for myself and for the family. As Mrs. Cecilia says, cooking is an act of affection, and the first to receive that affection should be yourself. One of the things that worried me most about aging was losing my memory. I saw it happening to some friends and it scared me. It was during a routine checkup that my geriatrician gave me valuable advice. "Joe, memory is like a little plant. It needs to be watered every day to stay strong." I started paying more attention to the small forgetfulness of everyday life. Where did I put my glasses? What day is it today? What did I come to buy at the market? I realized that often the problem wasn't memory itself, but lack of attention. I was doing everything on autopilot without really paying attention. My first strategy was to create a morning ritual. Every day when I wake up, I look at the calendar and say out loud the date, the day of the week, and my commitments for the day. At first, my grandson Peter laughed when he caught me talking to myself in the kitchen. "Grandpa, today is Monday, March 15th. I have to go to the pharmacy and then meet the walking group." But soon, he understood the importance of this exercise. Another habit I developed was doing crossword puzzles. Sarah brought me a little magazine and soon I was hooked. I started with the easiest ones, but today I solve the difficult ones. It's impressive how this helps not only memory but also vocabulary. When I find a new word, I write it down in a special notebook. I already have 3 notebooks full of interesting words. An interesting discovery was the power of music. I started listening to the old songs I used to dance to with Emily and realized I remembered all the lyrics. Mr. Frank from the walking group told me that music is an excellent exercise for the brain. Now every late afternoon I put on my old records and sing along. My granddaughter Mary, who's 15, even recorded a video of me singing "What a Wonderful World" and said I became famous on her Face Something thing. But it wasn't all roses at the beginning. There were days when frustration hit hard. Once I forgot Sarah's birthday, I was devastated. That's when I started using a trick I learned from Mrs. Cecilia, association. For example, Sarah's birthday is on Columbus Day, October 12th. I never forgot again. To remember to take my medications, I associated each one with a meal. The blood pressure one with breakfast, the cholesterol one with lunch. Another technique I developed was creating stories to remember things. When I go to the market, instead of making a common list, I create a little story with the items I need to buy. The milk met the bread at the bakery. They went to buy tomatoes to make a salad with lettuce. It might seem silly, but it works, and I have fun creating these crazy stories. The cell phone also became an important ally. Peter taught me how to use the phone's calendar to mark appointments, but I make a point of writing everything down in a little notebook too. The act of writing helps to fix it in memory. And there's more. I discovered that doing mental calculations instead of using the calculator is an excellent mental exercise. One of the activities that helped me the most was starting to tell stories to my grandchildren. Every Friday night, they come for a Grandpa Tells All session. I tell them about my childhood, about how I met their grandmother, about the adventures of my youth. To prepare these stories, I need to exercise my memory, organize the events in chronological order. The little ones love it, especially when I show old photos and saved objects. I also started doing small daily challenges. For example, memorizing a family member's phone number, remembering the names of all the flowers in my little garden, memorizing a new recipe. They're simple exercises, but they keep the mind active and alert. One of the greatest joys was when I managed to help Mr. Frank remember where he had kept some important documents. I used the same association techniques I learned with him. Remember what you were doing when you put the papers away. What show was on TV? Little by little, he remembered and found everything. That's when I realized I wasn't just taking care of my memory, but also being able to help others. Today I understand that keeping memory active is a daily job, like watering a plant, as my doctor said. It's not because we age that we need to accept forgetfulness as something natural. Of course, some lapses happen. They happen to people of any age. But with dedication and the right exercises, we can keep our minds sharp and active for much longer. As my granddaughter Mary says, "Grandpa, you have a better memory than many young people out there." And she's right. At 74 years old, I feel that my memory is even better than a few years ago, because now I know that, just like the body, the mind also needs daily exercise, care, and attention. It was on a Saturday morning that I learned one of the most important lessons of my journey. Excited about all the progress I had made, the walks, the healthy eating, the memory exercises, I decided it was time to increase the pace. After all, I was feeling like a young boy again. That day, instead of our usual 40-minute walk, I decided I would walk for 2 hours straight. When Mrs. Cecilia warned me, "Joe, take it easy," I replied with that cockiness of someone who thinks they know everything. "No way, I'm great." Mr. Frank shook his head, knowing well that stubborn side of me. At first, I was feeling invincible. I went beyond our usual route, explored new streets in the neighborhood, even ventured to climb a hill we always avoided. That's when I felt that twinge in my knee, the same one I had felt 2 years ago when it all started. But this time, instead of stopping and listening to my body, I decided to continue. The result? I spent a whole week barely able to walk. Sarah had to take me to the doctor, who gave me that "I've seen this story before" look. It was there, sitting in the waiting room with an ice pack on my knee, that I had an enlightening conversation with Mrs. Margaret, that same lady who had inspired me at the beginning of my journey. "Joe," she said with that wisdom of her 87 years, "our body is like a very valuable musical instrument. If you play it too hard, the strings break. If you play it too softly, no music comes out. The secret is in the balance." During that week of recovery, I had a lot of time to reflect. I realized I was repeating a common mistake, confusing limits with limitations. Respecting the body's limits doesn't mean giving in to age or stopping doing things. It means being smart enough to recognize how far we can go at each moment. I started paying more attention to the signals my body was sending me. I learned that there are days when I can walk more and others when I need to go slower. When my knee hurts a little, I do lighter exercises. When I feel more energetic, I can venture a little more. The important thing is to maintain consistency, not intensity. In eating, I also learned to respect these limits. I realized that some foods, even healthy ones, didn't sit well with me at night, so I started having lighter dinners. I discovered that my body digested fruits better in the morning, so I reorganized my meal times. One day, I was talking with my grandson Peter about video games. Yes, he tries to teach me. And he explained to me about the levels of the games. "Grandpa, you can't want to go from level 1 straight to 10. You have to go slow learning each level." I found that comparison perfect. It's exactly like that with our body. We need to respect each phase, each moment. I created a diary where I write down how I feel each day. It's nothing complicated. I just mark if I slept well, if I felt any pain, how my energy was. This helps me identify patterns and better understand my limits. For example, I discovered that on colder days I need a longer warm-up before walks. One of the most important discoveries was about sleep. Before, when I couldn't sleep, I would force it, tossing and turning in bed for hours. Now, I respect when my body is more agitated. I get up, make some tea, read a bit, and only go back to bed when I really feel sleepy. I also learned not to compare myself to others. Each body has its history, its time, its challenges. Mr. Frank can walk for longer than I can, but he has difficulty with balance exercises. Mrs. Cecilia is great at yoga, but needs to go slower on walks. And that's okay. As the saying goes, each one knows where their own shoe pinches. Today, at 74 years old, I feel that I finally understood what it truly means to take care of oneself. It's not just about exercising or eating well. It's knowing how to listen to and respect your own body. It's understanding that some days will be stronger, others weaker, and that this is part of life. Sarah always says I'm wiser, calmer. And she's right. I learned that being healthy isn't about being the strongest or the most resilient. It's finding the balance between challenging our limits and respecting them. As Mrs. Margaret says, life is a long dance, Joe, and in every good dance, there must be rhythm and harmony. I never imagined that a small garden on the balcony of my apartment would change my life so much. It all started when Sarah brought a basil plant to give life to my kitchen. At first, I thought the little plant wouldn't last a week. After all, I never had much of a green thumb. Emily was the one who took care of our old garden, but there was something special about seeing those little green leaves every morning. The smell of basil reminded me of the spices Emily used in the kitchen, and I started using some leaves in my own recipes. It was Mrs. Cecilia, always attentive, who noticed my growing interest in the little plant. "Joe, why don't we start an herb garden on your balcony?" she suggested one day after our morning walk. Mrs. Cecilia, besides being an expert in walking, was a skilled gardener. The following weekend, she showed up with some seedlings: parsley, chives, mint, rosemary. They're hardy plants, perfect for beginners, she explained. We created a small project. The balcony of my apartment, which was previously a dead space with just 2 old chairs, gained new life. Peter, my teenage grandson, helped me research online about apartment gardening. We discovered we could use cut PET bottles as pots, creating a vertical garden to make better use of the space. The process of preparing the pots, mixing the soil with humus, I learned that new word, and planting the seedlings, it all became a pleasurable ritual. My mornings gained new meaning. I wake up early, have my coffee, and go straight to the balcony to check on my girls, as I started calling my plants. The first time I saw a new sprout emerging was an indescribable emotion. It was a cherry tomato seedling that grew on its own in the mint pot, a seed that came in the organic compost. I photographed each stage of growth and sent it to the family in the WhatsApp group. My granddaughter Mary joked, "Grandpa became a plant influencer." But it wasn't just the plants that grew, I grew with them too. I learned about patience by observing the time it took for each one to develop. Some grew fast, like mint, which needed to be pruned frequently. Others, like rosemary, took their time, each at its own pace, just like us humans. Gardening also became a gentle and enjoyable physical exercise. Squatting to take care of the lower pots, stretching to reach the plants in the vertical garden, carrying watering cans. All of this kept my body moving in a natural and pleasant way. The doctor even praised my mobility at the last checkup. Over time, my little garden grew. I gained more confidence and started experimenting with other plants. I planted colorful peppers, which not only seasoned my food, but made the balcony more beautiful. I managed to propagate succulents, which are perfect for the city's dry climate. Each achievement was celebrated as a small victory. The most interesting thing was how the garden attracted life to my balcony. Small birds started visiting, especially in the morning. Some butterflies would come to investigate the flowers of the herbs when I let them bloom. Even a ladybug made its home there. Peter got so excited that he started a photography project, documenting all the visitors to Grandpa's garden. My little green paradise also became a meeting point. Other residents of the building started stopping by to chat about plants. We exchanged cuttings, tips, and experiences. Mr. Frank, who also lives alone, got inspired and started his own garden. Now we have a friendly competition to see who can grow the most lush mint. The plants taught me a lot about life. I learned that just as they need water, sun, and nutrients in balance, we also need balanced care, physical and emotional. When a plant isn't doing well, it's usually because something is missing or in excess. The same goes for us. One of the most beautiful lessons came from an experience with my basil plant, that first one Anne gave me. It started to wilt, and I thought it was going to die. But with patience, adjustments in watering, and a bit more sun, it recovered completely. It made me think about how sometimes we just need different care, a new angle of sun in life to bloom again. Today, my balcony is my little piece of peace. It's where I start and end my days. In the morning, I tend to the plants while planning my day. In the afternoon, I sit in my rocking chair, a gift from the kids last Christmas, and enjoy the sunset amidst the greenery and the aromas of the herbs. As Mrs. Cecilia says, when you plant, you also plant a little bit of yourself. After Martha passed away, one of the hardest things was dealing with loneliness. Even with frequent visits from children and grandchildren, there were moments when the silence in the apartment seemed deafening. It was through friendships, old and new, that I rediscovered the pleasure of company and conversation. It all started with our walking group. What was just a meeting for exercise turned into a circle of true friendships. Mr. Frank, Mrs. Cecilia, and I created a routine that went far beyond morning walks. On Wednesdays, we gathered to play cards at the community center. At first, it was just a pastime, but soon it became a sacred tradition. "Joe, you need to connect with the world," Mrs. Cecilia said one day, seeing me reluctant to accept an invitation for an afternoon tea. She was right, as always. Gradually, I opened myself up to new social experiences. I discovered that the community center offered dance classes for seniors. At first, I was embarrassed. Me, a widower, dancing? But Mr. Frank convinced me. Life doesn't stop, my friend. The dance classes brought me more than physical exercise. I met Mrs. Teresa, an elegant lady who had also lost her partner. She taught me that it's possible to smile again, even while carrying the longing in your heart. We became great friends, sharing stories about our deceased spouses and supporting each other in difficult moments. Technology, which used to scare me, became an important ally. Peter, my teenage grandson, had the patience to teach me how to use WhatsApp and Facebook. "Grandpa, this way you can keep in touch with everyone," he said enthusiastically. At first it was confusing. So many buttons and symbols. But with his help and a lot of perseverance, I learned to navigate this virtual world. I created a WhatsApp group called Young at Heart, where we share our daily adventures, recipes, and even memes. I learned that word too. It's amazing how a simple good morning message can make a difference in someone's life. Mrs. Cecilia always says our group is her first read of the day, but not everything is rosy in the world of friendships. I had to learn to deal with losses too. Mr. Manuel, one of the first friends I made in the walking group, left us last year. It was a hard blow for all of us. But together we found strength to honor his memory. We planted a tree in the community center garden in his honor. He loved plants as much as I do. One of the most beautiful discoveries was realizing that we can make friends at any age. At the supermarket, I met Mr. Anthony, who works as a bagger. At 68, he has contagious energy and always has a funny story to tell. Now I make a point of going shopping during his shift just to have our weekly conversations. Friendship with my neighbors also blossomed. Mrs. Mary, from apartment 402, always brings me a piece of cake when she bakes. In return, I share the fresh herbs from my garden. Mr. Albert, from 301, we discovered that we root for the same soccer team. Now we get together to watch important games, reminiscing about old matches and celebrating victories or lamenting defeats together. One of the greatest joys was organizing a monthly lunch with friends. Everyone brings a dish, and we spend the afternoon talking, laughing, and sharing stories. Anne got emotional when she saw the table full of people at the last gathering. "Dad, it's so good to see you like this, surrounded by friends," she said with teary eyes. I learned that friendship in old age has a special flavor. There's no more of that youthful rush, that need to impress. We are more authentic, more truthful. The conversations are deeper, the laughter more genuine. As Mr. Frank says, the older we get, the younger our friendship becomes. Today, at 74, my social calendar is busier than when I was younger. Between walks, dance classes, card games, lunches with friends, and community center meetings, I barely have time to be alone. And that's wonderful. The loneliness that once scared me has given way to a network of affection that strengthens me every day. As Mrs. Teresa always says, friends are the family we choose. And I chose a large, diverse family full of life. Each person I met on this journey brought a different color to my life, filling it with laughter, stories, and lots of affection. I remember the day I retired almost 10 years ago. I thought I would finally have all the time in the world to rest. Little did I know I was about to start the most active and meaningful phase of my life. Not an activity based on obligations as before, but on choices that fulfill my soul. It was on a Sunday afternoon, organizing old photographs with my grandchildren, that I realized how much knowledge and experience I had to share. Peter and Mary were fascinated by the stories behind each photo. "Grandpa, you need to record all of this," Mary said, with that characteristic enthusiasm of young people. Thus was born my first post-retirement project, writing my memoirs. Not to publish a book, but to leave a legacy for my family. I bought a laptop, with Peter's technical help of course, and started typing my stories. At first it was difficult, the keys all looked the same, but over time I got the hang of it. The memoir project opened other doors. During one of our meetings at the community center, I mentioned that I was writing my stories. Soon, other seniors became interested in the idea. Mrs. Cecilia suggested we create a memory-sharing group. Thus was born the Storytellers, which meets every Thursday afternoon. But I didn't stop there. I discovered that the community center needed volunteers to help with adult literacy classes. With my experience as a former math teacher, I offered to give tutoring classes. Seeing the eyes of a 65-year-old woman light up when she solves her first equation is an indescribable emotion. My small garden also gained a greater purpose. I started teaching basic gardening to neighborhood children. Once a month, I transformed my balcony into a green classroom. Seeing those children marveling at planting their first seed makes me feel useful and connected to the future. One of the most rewarding projects arose when I discovered that many seniors in the neighborhood had difficulty with technology. Together with Peter, we organized basic cell phone and computer workshops. "Grandpa, you're living proof that you can learn at any age," he says, proud. Seeing other seniors managing to make video calls with their distant grandchildren fills me with joy. The kitchen also became a space of purpose. Once a month, along with other volunteers, we prepare meals for a nearby nursing home. I teach my simple and healthy recipes, showing that it's possible to cook well even with limited resources. But not every day is one of intense activity. I learn to value moments of pause and reflection too. Every morning after walking, I set aside an hour for reading. I rediscovered the pleasure of books, especially history and philosophy. As Mrs. Teresa says, the mind needs nourishment as much as the body. An important discovery was music. I dusted off my old guitar, stored away for years, and started practicing again. The hands are slower, it's true, but the sound still touches the soul. On Saturday afternoons, some friends gather at my house for our serenade. We're not professionals, but the joy of playing together is worth more than any perfect tune. The computer, which used to scare me, became a tool for connecting with the world. I take online courses on various subjects: art history, astronomy, photography. Sometimes the classes are difficult to follow, but curiosity keeps me motivated. As Mr. Frank says, the more we learn, the younger our mind becomes. One of the most special moments of the week is when I give chess lessons to Peter and his friends. The game, which I learned from my father so many years ago, now serves as a bridge between generations. As we move the pieces, we talk about life, their dreams, their doubts. It's a rich exchange that keeps me connected to the world of young people. Today, I understand that having an active life doesn't mean being always busy, but having purpose in each activity. Whether watering my plants, teaching math, playing guitar, or simply listening to friends' stories, each moment has its special meaning. As Anne says, "Dad, you're more alive than many young people I know." And she's right. At 74, I feel like I'm living one of the richest phases of my life. Not because I have more energy or time, but because I finally understood that each day is an opportunity to learn, teach, and make a difference in someone's life. One of the greatest lessons I learned on this journey of my 74 years was about the transformative power of gratitude. It seems simple, but it took me a while to understand that happiness isn't in great achievements, but in the ability to appreciate the small blessings of everyday life. It all started on a seemingly ordinary morning. I was on the balcony tending to my plants when I saw a hummingbird visiting the flowers in my garden. I stood there still, observing that small creature. Suddenly, I realized how many moments like this I had missed throughout my life, always rushing, always worried about the next commitment. It was Mrs. Teresa who introduced me to the practice of the gratitude journal. At first I thought it was a bit silly, a man my age writing in a little notebook, but she insisted, "Joe, try it for a week. If you don't like it, you can stop." I bought a simple notebook and started writing down every night 3 things I was grateful for that day. In the first few days, it was difficult. I wrote obvious things. I'm grateful for having health, for having family, for having a roof over my head. But gradually, I started noticing details that used to go unnoticed. The smile of the bakery owner, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the sound of my grandchildren's laughter on WhatsApp, the first rosebud that appeared in my garden. A significant change happened when I started being grateful even for the challenges. That knee pain that bothered me? It taught me to respect my limits. The loneliness after Martha's passing? It made me discover new friendships and rediscover my own company. As Mr. Frank says, there's no cloud so dark that it doesn't have a silver lining. The exercise of gratitude also changed my way of dealing with problems. When something goes wrong, and it always does, doesn't it, I try first to take a deep breath and think, what can I learn from this? What can I be grateful for even in this difficult situation? I remember a day when the elevator broke down. I live on the 3rd floor, and with my knee, climbing stairs isn't easy. But instead of complaining, I decided to see the positive side. I climbed slowly, stopping on each floor, and discovered that the view from the staircase to the building's garden was beautiful. Now, even with the elevator working, sometimes I choose to use the stairs just to appreciate that view. Mary, my granddaughter, noticed the change in me. "Grandpa, you're different, lighter, happier." She's right. Gratitude is like a special pair of glasses that makes us see life with more colors, more beauty. I started sharing this practice with my group of friends. In our meetings before starting any activity, each one says something they're grateful for. It's beautiful to see how this has changed the tone of our conversations. Even problems seem smaller when shared with gratitude. One of the most transformative practices was starting to express gratitude to people, not just feeling it but saying it. I started with my family. I wrote letters to my children, thanking them for all the love and care. Anne cried when she read hers. "Dad, we had never talked like this." I extended this practice to friends, neighbors, even to people I barely knew. The attentive pharmacy clerk, the doorman who takes care of the building so caringly, the lady at the newsstand who sets aside my favorite crossword puzzle. Small gestures of recognition that make all the difference. Positivity came as a natural consequence of gratitude. Not that artificial positivity of denying problems, but a more realistic and mature way of facing life. As Mrs. Cecilia says, life is like a garden. It has flowers and thorns, but we can choose which ones to focus our attention on. I created small daily gratitude rituals. In the morning, before getting out of bed, I give thanks for another day. During coffee, I appreciate each sip, each flavor. In the garden, I'm grateful for the growth of each plant. These are simple moments, but they fill my day with meaning. Sometimes, when I'm with my grandchildren, I share these reflections. Peter jokes saying I've become a philosopher grandpa, but I know they absorb these lessons. The other day I heard Mary telling a friend, "My grandfather taught me that being happy is knowing how to be grateful for the little things." Today I understand that gratitude and positivity are not just states of mind, they are daily choices. They are ways of seeing and living life. As that phrase I read somewhere says, gratitude transforms what we have into enough. With 74 years under my belt, I could say I've seen it all in this life. But the truth is that the more I live, the more I discover how much I still have to learn. Curiosity, which my mother always said was my factory defect, ended up becoming my greatest ally in old age. I remember well the day Peter arrived with his new video game. Instead of distancing myself, as many my age do, I asked him to teach me. "Grandpa, are you sure it's kind of complicated?" he said, surprised. 2 hours later, there I was, trying to drive a virtual car, crashing into everything, it's true, but having fun like a child. Technology, which used to scare me, became a door to new worlds. With Mary's help, I discovered podcasts. Now, while tending to my garden, I listen to programs about history, science, music. It's like having a private university in my earphones. As Mrs. Cecilia says, the mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. One of the biggest adventures was learning to do video conferencing. At first it was funny. I always appeared with only half my face on the screen, or I'd talk with the microphone muted. But perseverance paid off. Now, I participate in a virtual book club with people from all over the country. Just imagine, me, who never left the state, discussing books with folks from all across America. Adaptability came naturally with curiosity. When the pandemic hit, many of my friends isolated themselves completely. Of course, it was a difficult period, but I decided to adapt. I learned to shop online, participate in virtual exercise classes, and even created a storytelling group via video for my grandchildren and their little friends. One of the most interesting discoveries was digital photography. Anne gave me a simple camera as a gift, and I started photographing my garden. Soon I was experimenting with different angles, natural light, close-ups of flowers. The photos aren't professional, but each one tells a story. I created a digital album that I share with the family, my way of showing how I see the world. Curiosity also led me to unexpected places. When I found out that the community center offered Tai Chi classes, I thought, why not? At first, my balance was terrible, and I felt like an awkward duck. But each new movement learned was a small victory. Today, I practice every morning in the building's garden, and I even have some students joining me. But it's not all roses on this journey of discovery. Sometimes I feel frustrated when something doesn't go as expected. I tried to learn English on my cell phone and found it very difficult. Instead of giving up, I adapted my goal. I started learning just useful words and phrases to talk with my youngest grandson who lives in Canada. I'm not fluent, but I can now understand when he says, "I love you, Grandpa." One of the most important lessons I've learned is that adapting doesn't mean giving up who we are. When Amelia passed away, many thought I should sell the apartment and go live with the kids. Instead, I adapted the space to my new needs. I turned the spare room into a studio where I do crafts, paint, and welcome friends for our creative projects. Curiosity has also helped me maintain intergenerational connections. While I teach young people about old games and stories, I learn from them about memes, apps, and modern slang. As Peter says, "Grandpa, you're more in tune than a lot of young people out there." Today, I understand that true youth lies in the ability to marvel at the new, to adapt to changes, and to keep alive the desire to learn. As that old song goes, "What matters are the emotions I've lived." And so at 74, I continue my journey of discovery. Each day brings something new to learn. Each challenge is an opportunity for adaptation. Each satisfied curiosity opens the door to other questions. As Mrs. Teresa says, life is a school that never ends, and curiosity is our best school supply.